So now that the hype from the Tombs of Amascut has started to die down a bit, the RuneScape market has started to crash very quickly. Now across the board, a ton of items are losing value, but is that because they were overvalued to begin with and simply just returning to what their pre-raids value would have been? Or is it more than that? So there's no doubt that the market has seen a pretty large correction following Raids 3. I mean, directly after the release, we got a huge crash in a wide variety of items, and while some items actually did recover from that, most actually just continued on a pretty sustained downward trend. So I think a great example is the Dragon Warhammer. There was a big plateau until Raids 3 released, and then a huge crash, but it never really recovered from that. It just continued down, and now is worth 25 mil. Now if you look back at the last year, it's actually returning to its pre-next release price. If we recall, about a year ago this time, most items were at all-time lows. They were crashing incredibly quickly, and really the only thing that turned that around was next. So most items jumped up for the next release, and while it did crash after, most of these items actually kept momentum from that and kept raising up all the way until the Tombs of Amascut. Just a ton of pent up hype across a wide variety of items that we were bound for, I think, a pretty significant market crash. I think this pent up demand is why the majority of items are crashing right now. I mean, if you look at so many random ones, cosmic runes are down like 30% just this month. Death runes have been crashing from 180 down to 150. Blood runes are down a ton from a peak of nearly 400 down to 240. We have the Dragon Hunter Crossbow, which has continued to go down, currently worth around 60 mil, which is pretty much an all-time low as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, looks like it. Well, we don't count that. So although there's a ton of things going on at the macro level, I want to zero in on a couple of individual items here because I think they're interesting. Let's start with one of the most talked about items the last couple of days, and that is the Osmundan's Fang. Now, despite the Fang being a very strong and widely used item right now, it's been crashing significantly the last week and more so the last month, going from 190 mil down to bottoming out at 100 mil. So although it's very strong, it's still a very common reward from the Tombs of Amascut, and I don't think it's really hit its price floor just from the release. There are a ton of Fangs coming into the game, and although more people can afford them now, the supply is just going to be, I think, too high, and the price is just going to continue going downwards. Now the Fang is in a very strong place right now, but it's actually taken away some uses from certain other items in its weapon class, such as the Dragon Hunter Lance and the Rapier. Now the Grassy Rapier has had one of the larger market crashes this month. Previous to the Tombs of Amascut, it was worth around 126 mil. Yeah, it jumped up to like 200 mil plus, but ever since people have gotten their hands on the Fang and the Fang has dropped down to a more reasonable price, the Rapier was destined to lose a lot of value. The Rapier was at one of its all-time highs when it was being used in TOA, but as people pushed to higher and higher invocations, the Rapier became obsolete and the Fang became the new best in slot melee weapon. So it quickly dropped relevancy in the raid and kind of outside of it too. It is still one of the best weapons to use against low defense monsters, but the Fang is better than it at a lot of different places. So the Rapier hit, I think, an all-time low of around 65 mil. I'm not sure if it's ever been that cheap before. Doesn't look like it, although it's kind of hard to tell. It's kind of a weird day when the Avernic now is worth more than the Grassy Rapier by a significant amount. Now the other main item that was competing with the Fang is actually the Dragon Hunter Lance. Now because the Fang is so good against the high defense monsters, it's actually quite good against Vorkath, it's quite good against Rune Dragons, and is also quite good in Chambers of Xeric. In some circumstances, the Fang is actually better against dragons, which is kind of crazy. So the Lance went from 80 mil back in July down to around 40 mil now, which is almost at an all-time low. I mean, it's pretty similar to where it was the last year. So once again, the real question is kind of hard to answer. Was this entire bubble here just hype and we've just kind of slotted right back down to where we were before? Or has the Lance actually lost a lot of uses in a lot of people's eyes, and is it destined to fall further and further? Now another item that actually has a very similar trend to this is the Dragon Warhammer. A year ago, the Dragon Warhammer was worth around 25 mil. Today it's worth around 25 mil again. The Dragon Warhammer kept its value pretty much all year long in the assumption that it would be useful during the third raid. I mean, it was useful during the other two, so why not the third one? But it turns out the Dragon Warhammer is just not used at all. Instead, people were actually using Bando's God Swords, and for a little while they almost reached the exact same value. The BGS and the Dragon Warhammer almost being worth the same price, kind of crazy. Now this week we've also had a pretty significant crash in the price of the new raids items, with across the board all of them losing value, even widely used ones like the Osmond's Fang. Now the Tunic and Shadow has been on a bit of a roller coaster due to many changes to the raid itself and the Shadow. The Shadow actually received a couple buffs in this time frame, one to make it stronger in the raid, and one was because the accuracy percentage wasn't actually applied correctly, and it got a micro buff from that as well. Without those changes, I think the Shadow would have crashed a lot quicker and more significantly, but now that the raid has been at a while, things have started to crash. Last week the Shadow was worth 1.8 bill, this week is worth now 1.4 bill. And it's just not the Shadow as well, we have the Mastery armor set. Last week it was worth around 550 mil, and now it's worth 420 mil, so it's lost 130 mil this week. The Elidness Ward has bottomed out now at 8 mil. It was holding pretty steady at 13 mil for a couple of weeks, but now lost, another 5 mil of value. And the Lightbearer, I mean, this item once again kind of went up and down a lot due to the fact that it's actually a really strong item, but it is of course one of the most common raid items, which means there's not much you can do about it. When you look at the Occult Necklace, that item is so overpowered, probably the strongest single item in the entire game, but it's worth 500k. Doesn't matter how good an item is, after a while if there's enough supply, it will get cheap. The Lightbearer is a common item and now it's worth, around 10 mil. Now another set of items that has been crashing a lot as well are Nightmare items. The Inquisitor's armor set has been outclassed by Torva for almost a year now, but there was some hope that maybe Inquisitors would be useful at the third raid. I mean, that's something I actually personally thought. Turns out it's not. Torva is just better. And really I think we're kind of just carrying on the original trend that we were seeing a year ago. It was worth 226 before the next update, and now it's down to, about 180 mil. The entire Inquisitor's armor set is now worth less than I think the Torva full helm is, which is kind of crazy. Now the Harmonized Orb has dropped a lot, no doubting that. It went from a peak of nearly 700 mil down to about 250 mil or something at its low point. Now it's actually started to go back up recently, which is kind of interesting. This week the Harmonized Orb went from 280 mil up to 400 mil, which is kind of crazy. The Eldritch Orb also went from 60 mil up to 120 mil, so that's doubled in price. And the Volatile Orb went from 100 mil up to 145 mil. Now I have no idea why these items are going up this quickly. I think they're kind of susceptible to some pretty big market changes right now because not many people are doing the Nightmare. I think because the quantity of people doing the Nightmare has gone down so much, the supply for these items have been cut a lot, and that might be why they're going up. Alternatively, it could just be influenced by a group of people. No clue, but I've definitely seen a lot of people shilling the Eldritch Orb and the Harmonized Orb, so it seems kind of random for the Eldritch Orb to now be worth what it was back in 2020. But, I could just be missing something here as well. Now, one of the few items that's actually been going up this month is the Zerite Crossbow. The Zerite Crossbow crashed pretty quickly after the release of Raids 3, but has slowly started to go back up as people found more uses for this item. Not only is it actually pretty useful in TOA, people have learned, also the price of Torva items and Nex items have held pretty consistent, which means Nex is still probably the best money per hour in the game, even though it's much older content. And each Torva piece is actually still worth a lot. The Torva plate body is 450 mil. The Torva plate legs is 400 mil. Not changed a whole lot. And the Torva full helm is 200 mil. Worth more than an entire Inquisitor's armor set. Now I also want to take a minute to have a look at some of the higher volume items. I know I always miss doing this a lot, but they can be just as interesting and, are still a very significant part of the market. The Saradomin Brew has been on a bit of a roller coaster recently. Pretty much right after the Tombs of Masket release, they started to shoot up. They hit a peak of 12,000, which is pretty insane, and now they are starting to crash really quickly. They're worth around 9,000 each, but if you look at the all-time view, brews went up a lot. They didn't go up a lot immediately, but they slowly raised up all year, and finally peaked at the end of September, before starting their slow but inevitable crash down. Super Restorers held a remarkably consistent value pretty much all of 2022 due to mainly Nex, but after the release of Tombs of Masket, they've crashed a lot, crashing by about 40% already. Blood runes is something I touched on briefly, but let's take another quick look at it. Blood runes have gone from 400 GP down to 250. That is massive, putting blood runes at their lowest point since the release of the scythe. And I think the scythe is the main culprit here. Because the scythe is not used at TOA very much, the demand for blood runes has plummeted. I don't really think the supply has gone up significantly, although I think it has maybe gone up a bit. I think once the use of the scythe gets picked up a bit more, blood runes will recover a little bit, but for now they are pretty cheap. Another interesting item here is the Dragon Dart Tip. The Dragon Dart Tip is actually a drop from the Tombs of Masket, and if that followed a similar trend to the rest of the items, the Dragon Dart Tip would be worth way less than it was before the update. But because people were using Dragon Darts in the raid a lot, even though the supply like quadrupled, the price also went up by about double. However, now that things have slowed down a bit, yeah, they're going back down again. Finally here, we always have to have a look at the bond. Still kind of looks like Tombs of the Masket really crashed the price of bonds. They've yet to recover from that. They went from around 7 mil down to 5 mil for a little while. This does often happen when tons of new items are released because, you know, people get the credit card out, they buy the bonds, they sell them so they can get some gold, afford that shiny new Tumican Shadow. Bonds are constantly trending upwards, so although there were tons of fluctuations throughout the year, I still think by the end of 2022 we might hit a sustained 7 mil bond. That would be my guess anyway, but we will have to wait and see. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time. Now, before I go here, I want to give a giant thank you to all of my members over on YouTube. Thank you so much to March3258 and Pewter, who just joined the Dragon tier, joining the Hybrid, Alejandra, and Kush Patel. Thank you guys so much, really appreciate it. Also, thank you to YoYoSup89, Carter, Mexos, Fat606, and NDM001 for subscribing at the Runite tier. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.